Thank you once again for tuning in to the podcast that sheds light on some of the most horrific crimes committed by teenagers today, The Dark Place. I'm your host, Adam Chavin, and before we begin tonight's episode, please go like, subscribe, or follow our social media pages on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, or TikTok, The Other People Show. I want to say thank you to each and every one of you. You all have made our show grow over the last 11 weeks, and I'm very appreciative to that we have far exceeded the expectations of this show. It was originally conceived only as a 6 or 8 episode series, and now we're continuing into episode, I think, 12. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Let's get on with tonight's case. In many of the featured cases, it can be sometimes tricky to understand how the murderer's actions are often out of the blue and random. But tonight's episode and tonight's case does not fall into that category. Tonight, we're going to discuss the case of Alyssa Bustamante. Alyssa was born January 28, 1994, and she was born to Michelle and Caesar Bustamante. She was born in California. Her parents had a history of drug abuse, and her mother would often overdose in front of her many, many times when she was a young kid. Young Alyssa would often hear abuse and violence from the neighbors, from inside of her household, and she was virtually unattended to for the first couple of years on and off of her life. Eventually, Child Protective Services removed Alyssa from the custody of her mother and dad and put her in the custody of her grandparents. So she lived in an abusive environment from birth until 8 years old. She grew up with a mother that was constantly taking drugs and ODing in front of her. Her father, although might not have been abusive to her, was abusive to others, Alyssa's mother, and some of Alyssa's brothers and sisters. So from a very early age, Alyssa was brought into the world, into a chaotic, troubled atmosphere. No fault of her own. Like I said, eventually Child Protective Services put her into the care of her grandmother. And despite living with a loving grandmother, Alyssa still had a darkness inside of her. Alyssa had violent and suicidal thoughts, and even once tried to commit suicide by swallowing a bottle of pills when she was only 13 years old. After that event, she was diagnosed with antidepressants, or prescribed antidepressants, and she was diagnosed with depression, but it went unnoticed until, almost 12 and 13 years old. She had all these tendencies inside of her. Now, what was very perplexing and interesting about Alyssa was that Alyssa seemed like a good person. She had good grades. She conducted herself with respect and honor at school. She didn't get in trouble at school. She did what she was supposed to. She didn't wear any makeup that would draw attention to herself. Very little makeup did she wear during school. But in private, that's where her dark side came out. She didn't wear the makeup that she wore during school, but she wore makeup that was more goth or smeared and over-exaggerated. she cut herself, and she dressed in Gothic style clothing, and she had a Gothic morbid fascination. She would cut on herself the word hate, but also cut the 1960s peace symbol as well. Now, at the time of Alyssa's arrest, she had self-inflicted over 300 cuts on her body, along with burn marks and bites. Online, she listed her hobbies as cutting and killing people. And while Alyssa did talk about killing people to a group of friends, but unfortunately, they didn't take her seriously. Elizabeth Olten was friends with Alyssa's half-sister. Alyssa picked Olten up. Well, Alyssa picked Olten as a perfect target of an opportunity for her dark, murderous fantasies. There was some prep time that went on that's a little bit different than some of the cases that we spoke about. Alyssa prepared for murder by digging 2 graves. So think about it like this. When most teenagers, they have Friday or Saturday off, they sleep in, they might get together with a friend or bum around the house in pajamas all day. But 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante had the Friday off from school. And how did she choose to spend that Friday? She spent the day digging 2 holes in the ground to be used as graves. So instead of taking the typical Friday off, your high school 15-year-old, maybe go to the movies, go to the bowling alley, go shopping, do something fun, maybe even be a little bit mischievous and smoke marijuana. But that wasn't what Alyssa was doing. She had murder and death on her mind. She knew the time was coming when she was going to be ready to murder someone. Who? She didn't know. But she knew that she had to dig these graves because it might not just be one person. It might be 2 people. Because she had this in her heart. Did she have this in her heart because she was born evil? Or was this inside of her heart because of her surroundings? Now, Alyssa went on with her life as usual. She went to school. She hung out with friends. All the while waiting for the perfect opportunity to murder. That murder and opportunity came just 4 days later on October 21st, 2009. In the evening, when her neighbor, 9-year-old Elizabeth Olten, was walking home from her friend's house. Elizabeth was last seen at 6:15 p.m. When she left her friend's house to go home, her house was only 4 houses down. Elizabeth was never seen alive again. When she hadn't returned home, the family frantically began looking for her, and they called the police to report her missing around 7 p.m. Her family, knowing she was afraid of the dark and would not have wandered off alone, grew increasingly worried. They knew Elizabeth. This wasn't like Elizabeth. She would not stay out after dark because she was afraid of the dark. She wanted to be home. She liked being home. Her family knew something was wrong. They knew that Elizabeth would not stay out after dark alone willingly. And they knew within the heart of hearts that they needed to find her. But what they didn't know was that it was already too late. Alyssa, seeing the opportunity that she finally had to kill someone, took that opportunity. She grabbed Elizabeth. Walked further and further away, holding her hand, saying, "We're going to play a game," saying, we'll go back in just a few minutes. Alyssa had no intention of letting Elizabeth go. She grabbed Elizabeth, she beat her, strangled her, then she stabbed her with a kitchen knife and slit her throat. She then dumped the body into one of the graves that she had dug the week before in the nearby wooded area. Now, police were continuously searching for the little girl, including the area where the body would eventually be found, but they found no trace of her. They pinged Elizabeth's cell phone, and though it showed the location as being in the woods where her body was, the police searched the area without locating the body or the cell phone. In the end, a letter led police to Alyssa, where she had confessed. It was herself who led police to the grave where the body of the brutally slain girl lie. Now, you might be asking yourself, why did Alyssa lure Elizabeth Olten to the woods and strangle and stab her? That question still is brought up until this very day. But it could be down to one simple thing. Alyssa murdered Elizabeth Olten simply due to the homicidal tendencies and just basically wanting to know what it would be like to kill someone, wanting to see what it would feel like. After the murder, Alyssa Bustamante wrote in her journal, and then she later scribbled it out, "I just effing killed someone. I strangled them and I slit their throat and stabbed them. Now they're dead. I don't know how to feel at the moment. It was amazing. As soon as you get the, oh my God, I can't do this feeling, it's pretty enjoyable. As soon as you get over the, oh my God, I can't do this feeling, it's pretty enjoyable. I'm kind of nervous and shaky though right now. Okay, I got to go to church now. LOL." That was Alyssa Bustamante's journal right after she killed 9-year-old Elizabeth Olten. Now, as I said, they've pondered before, still pondering, but this case is actually really simple. Just like I said, the simple explanation given by Alyssa herself was the reason she wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. The psychological implications of that statement are obvious. Normal, mentally stable people, even if they have ever wondered that question themselves, do not go out and actually commit the murder in order to find out. What made Alyssa take and decide to actually find out about her curiosity? That answer might be a little more complicated. Now, were there clues about Alyssa? Sure. In hindsight, there are so many clues. The clues and warning signs that something was not right with Alyssa was all around. It was sprinkled about. She had shown signs of psychological problems in the past. She'd attempted suicide numerous times, and she was on medication for depression. She had been given both inpatient and outpatient psychiatric care after her last suicide attempt. She was a cutter, someone who generally deals with emotional pain by cutting and inflicting physical pain on themselves or self-mutilating. Her best friend, when interviewed, claims Alyssa had once told her that she wondered what it would be like to kill someone. You have to also think about Alyssa's parents. Neither of her parents were around, and Alyssa was in the care of her grandmother. Now, Alyssa was born to a teenage mother who was only 15 herself. She had a criminal record for petty crimes, drug possession, a DUI, overdosing. Alyssa's father was in and out of prison, like I said. He later on, and I forgot to mention this, but he was serving a 10-year sentence for assault. Alyssa described him as violent, depressed, and angry. None of these things are an excuse for murder. But we need to stop and think, as a society, was there something that could have been done to help Alyssa and prevent any of this from happening? If someone had stepped in, could we have prevented this vicious murder from occurring? Now, police have speculated that the reason Alyssa had dug not one, but 2 graves was because she had planned to kill and murder her 2 younger brothers originally. But grabbed Elizabeth when the opportunity presented itself. Now, Alyssa didn't care who she killed. She didn't have a vendetta out against Elizabeth Olten or her younger brothers or any other person in the society. She may have hated everyone. She may have seen how others behaved and wished that she could have that kind of a childhood. She may have been angry because she was brought up in that environment. Also, she had a YouTube, and it backs up the story, where she clearly took delight in inflicting pain on her brothers through videos that were posted on YouTube. While there's been no evidence really to support this allegation, other than that, the question of why there were 2 graves still kind of lingers. They do not think Alyssa had other targets in mind. Would she have killed again if she had not got caught? I think so, because she said it was amazing. She said she was glad that she had done it. And she had to go to church afterwards. Laugh out loud. So Alyssa was arrested and charged with first-degree murder in the death of Elizabeth Olten. She appeared in court on November 17th, 2009, where the judge ruled that she should be tried as an adult due to the severity of this crime. Despite her confession to the crime, as well as having led the police to the body, she entered a plea of not guilty. Now, when she was in custody, she tried to harm herself by cutting herself with her own fingernail. She's said to have been exhibiting signs of anxiety and severe depression in jail, and has been under suicide watch as well. So, as of updated on February 8th, 2012, there is quite a large gap when now 18-year-old Alyssa admitted to taking a knife to the throat of Elizabeth Olten and slitting it, and then strangling her with her bare hands afterwards. Can you imagine? You're sitting in the courtroom. This has been going on. And now you hear this 18-year-old girl tell how she took this young girl by the hand, led her into the woods, slit her throat, and then strangled her with her bare hands. She was later indicted and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in armed criminal action and was sentenced to life in prison with a possibility of parole. However, due to her additional conviction of armed criminal action, if she was granted a conditional release in 2024, she will have to have consecutive life sentences of 30 years in prison, which makes her earliest possible release to be 2054, when she is 60 years old. That means if that happens, if she is released in 2054, she will have served 45 years in prison. 45 years in prison for the murder of 9-year-old Elizabeth Olten. Is that enough? Is that more than enough? It's hard to really say in the case of Alyssa Bustamante. What if Alyssa was born into a quote-unquote normal household? What if Alyssa had a lot of the things that you and I take for granted? Someone maybe to tell them goodnight, tell them, I love you, I'll see you in the morning. Maybe holding them when she cried. But Alyssa didn't have these. She didn't have these things. She was a small child, brought into a world of violence, abuse, neglect, drugs. So did she ever really have a chance? It's another sad case that, looking back in hindsight, we're able to see where the pieces just don't fit. But you can't make it work after the fact. Elizabeth Olten is gone. Her memory lives on, but her flesh and bone are buried. Alyssa Bustamante is currently serving time for the murder of Elizabeth Olten. And like I said, she will be possibly up for parole in 2054. Regardless of the outcome, it's another sad case. Hindsight is 2020. Unfortunately, that can't help the victim. I'm Adam. Thank you for joining on another episode of The Dark Place. Have a good night.